discussing a lot of important issues. So we already have in here wonderful people that will participate with us in this panel that will be exactly about how to integrate even more the refugees and migrants that are, well, exiting their original countries, and we are actually having to know what's been done best. Mexico is a great example, fortunately, and we'll learn also what can be replicated in other countries. So first of all, to be clear, like human mobility can be seen right now as a risk. It must not. It's actually an opportunity, and today that's what we're going to learn with this four great people. So let me introduce you to the wonderful persons that will participate in here. First of all, Giovanni Lepri, welcome, representative in Mexico of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Also, Luciana Gandini, just let me fix this, okay. Luciana Gandini, senior researcher at UNAM, welcome. Also is joining us Dany Bahar, Director of Migration, Displacement and Humanitarian Policy at the Center of Global Development. Welcome. And Adriana Figueredo, Global Leader at the Tertiary Refugee Student Network. So I would like to start with Luciana Gandini. Luciana, can you please help us and provide a general context in this region and human mobility? Why are so many people moving to North America? Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Well, I would like to start to put on the table, we can characterize the current post-pandemic moment as one of significant mobility, defined by hemispheric, continental, and transnational and transcontinental mobility in the Americas. The current human movement involves not only people coming from their countries of origin, but also from other countries where people, they previously tried to live, and this is really important right now to understand what is happening with these people. The region shares a characteristic that is observed globally, the significant weight of forced mobility, including those in need of international protection. There is an important weight of irregular migratory transit across the continent, which is a result of the migration policies of several countries in the Americas. And the final result is a migration under very precarious and vulnerable conditions. And why has this occurred? It is the result of a confluence of complex factors. First of all, the post-pandemic situation of Latin American and the Caribbean economies that include inflation, a rising cost of life, and unemployment, as well as many other structural inequalities, of course. The post-pandemic context has a particular impact on migrants who were living in other countries. We can say that there was an imperfect integration or something like that. Of course, it's much complex than that. Another important aspect is political and institutional crisis in several countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, characterized by insecurity and criminals governance, between other things. In addition to the previous issues, there was a delayed incentive to migrate to the United States in a post-Trump era, which was frustrated with the pandemic. And finally, I would like to include the impact of the digital platform, such as TikTok, YouTube, WeChat, in addition to the influence of smuggling groups that incentivize migration. So this context changed the pre-pandemic dynamic in which migration to Latin American and the Caribbean countries predominate and restore a south-north migration pattern, and this is the new context right now. We are in an event and in a session talking about North America, but today, more than ever, it's impossible not to look at the rest of the continent to understand what is happening in this part of the continent. So to try to finally, because the time is running, I would like to say that in Latin America there is a complex and multi-level legal framework on migration and especially on asylum. And however, it can be described as a soft legality with limitation and it's in this implementation. The asylum system is not widely used in Latin America. Only 2 countries, Mexico and Brazil, have been using the expanded Cartagena refugee definition for the Venezuelan population and in other nationality. And finally, I would like to say that in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, there were created a lot of measures, ad hoc measures to respond to Venezuelan migration. This is a good thing, that is okay, that's really, really good experience to respond to this movement, one of the most important displacement in Latin America and the Caribbean. But right now, we need to try to respond to other nationalities. So we need to learn what is happening or what happened with Venezuelan displacement or try to apply for other nationalities that are movement through the old continent.
Thank you, Luciana, for giving us this context. Now, exactly because of this context that we are hearing, Giovanni, we would like to understand also about the Mexico example, because we've seen, at least in the past 6 years, that 50,000 refugees are or have been fully integrated in Mexico, and we would like to know how did that happen. We understand that UN High Commission for Refugees have been helping a lot because they have a local program exactly for this matter.
Thank you, Paola, and thank you first to the US-Mexico Foundation that has included in a discussion in North Capital Forum in the last 3 years how refugees can be good for the economies, how they can contribute in the economy. And I think, as you said, Paola, Mexico is a good example. There is a lot to do, and the second part of this session, we talk about what needs to be done and what are the challenges. But I think we have an evidence that with good policies and a framework that allows people to actually be entering and then be legal and enter the formal economy, refugee can contribute a lot. So I think that this is the main point. As Luciana was mentioning, people move. They move mostly south north. Migrants and refugees together. I represent the High Commission for Refugees, so I focus on refugees. I have here my colleagues from IOM, which work on the migrant part of it. But both are people that mostly they are moving for different reasons. Refugees move against their will. They had to leave their countries against their will. This is what they put them in common. 120 million people forcibly displaced in the world. So we are talking about very high numbers. And I think that it's important that we see examples on what has already been positively, I mean, we can take the positive example. So the first year, the North Capital Forum, we look at excellency in terms of business capacity to grow as a refugee in a new country. And we had, for example, we used the example of Canada. There is one interesting example, a chocolate factory, which is called Peace by Chocolate. Syrian refugees were arriving in Canada, and they managed to reopen the same job they were doing in Syria and became a very important producer of chocolate in Canada. So an example of success. We have another very clear example with Giovanni. The head director of Giovanni, founder of Giovanni, was a refugee from Turkey, a Kurd refugee from Turkey, arrived in the US and managed to become the biggest yogurt producer in the world. So we have those type of example. But also we have example, and we have example here around us of refugees that with the right set of tools, they manage to really integrate well in the society. We have Adriana here. She will talk about her experience. Said outside was playing violin. A violinist from Venezuela who managed to finish his studies and now to be well integrated in Mexico. But we have the 50,000 that Paola mentioned. Entonces, so just to go to the conclusion, I like to consider a bit as a recipe in which you need good ingredients, you need a good recipe, and then you need good cooks. And I think in that sense, it's why this has to be a public policy. It cannot be only left to private initiatives. It has to be a combination, and it has to be led by the effort by the public sector, because you need the legal framework, and you need also a number of actions to overcome the obstacles, for example, financial inclusion and other obstacles. But then we see on the case that we have here in Mexico, the 50,000 refugees find an environment in which there was a very strong need of labor force, and the human capital they were bringing was very well matching with, and is matching with the needs that Mexico has. And not only the big companies, we have companies like FEMSA or MABE, which became the best ambassador of UNHCR, because they go around the world and say, we are recruiting refugees in Mexico, and it's good for us. And it's good as a business case, not as a humanitarian case, but it's good as a business case. Why it's good? Because refugees are legal, are regular, they have all the paper in order, they have a much lower rotation than Mexicans, for many reasons we don't have the time to talk about it. But so they stay more with the companies, and so they're really responding to a need. So I would say that what we find here in Mexico is that with the right tools, you can have what we like to call it the win-win-win. It's a situation where refugees win because they have the second chance and they can rebuild their lives, and they demonstrate they can do it very well. Companies, so the private sector wins because they have a need, which is labor force that is not filled completely, but a refugee contribute to filling a gap, and it's good for the society because it's Mexico capable of actually integrating people that are coming from other countries. And I would add one, and I conclude here. I'm Italian, I tend to speak a lot. I see already Paola a bit nervous, but one last point, I think also there is a political dividend at the international level, because more people arrive to Mexico from all over the world and can stay and be part and become part of the society and contribute to the society. Less people continue to move irregularly to other places, mostly to the north and mostly to the US. So there is also another element I think we have to consider, that more we manage to have legal pathways, legal integration, formal employment, the more this contributes also to change a bit, and as Paola was saying at the beginning, this perception of a risk, this vision of something very negative into an opportunity and something that can be turned positive. So I'm not saying that this is easy or this can be done overnight, but to do things you need to start from somewhere. And I think in Mexico we have something that is good. We have an example of something that has worked, and that is working and is growing. The program that we are running in Mexico is now there are 600 companies that are participating, and if you ask them, most of them will say to you, it was good for me, for my company, to actually enter into this program. So I think we need to find a way to enlarge it, and in the second part we will talk about what are the obstacles to make this much broader, much bigger, and much more successful.
Thank you, Giovanni. And I personally have been really close to that project of Tent, which you were talking earlier about, with Giovanni, and it's great to see how private policies are working, but also public policies are now really important. So thank you for that perspective. Now, Dany, Bahar, you are an economist, and you have studied really good the socio-economic, both sides of integration of refugees across not only North America, but the Americas in general. What examples can you share with us regarding these socio-economic integration policy interventions focused specifically with refugees or on refugees?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, a very difficult one. But I want to start by saying that I really want to thank the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and North Capital Forum, because in most places, we are not there yet at the point of actually having this conversation about the policies that can help refugees. We are at the point of discussing that sometimes the toxic narrative, and these conversations need to happen. And at a global level, we're not even close there yet. So it's great to have this space to think about this together. I think that I totally agree with everything Giovanni said about the win-win-win situation. I think the challenge and the fact that the difference between migrants and refugees being a burden or an opportunity is a question of public policy, period. And I think the challenge there is to find what are these policies that are not only effective but also scalable. Because I think what many countries in the region are facing is that there's so much you can do when you build these coalitions, even very well-meaning and great coalitions with private sector, et cetera. But there's sometimes like tens, hundreds, thousands of refugees you're helping. Like the question is, how do we actually go much beyond that? And for that, you need to really think about scale. And this is going to become very important as we are. The world is changing in a way in which this conversation, I think, is going to be central. Like if you look particularly in North America, the US and Canada, and all developed nations, they are going through this transition, aging populations, that the solution to fill the labor shortages that you have and right now that are going to keep happening is going to be migration. It's going to be, and it's all going to have to go through how do you integrate people to be able to hit the ground running and fill all these labor shortages that are coming. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but what's happening in the border between the US and Mexico is not a border crisis, it's a labor market crisis. So in that sense, I think a few of the policies that we've studied that I think make a lot of sense in terms of effectiveness and scalability. The first one is capital flows. This is a little bit harder because it involves a lot of money, but thinking about how capital can flow to refugees themselves, who are predominantly more entrepreneurs than locals, so they can actually use the capital to create jobs, but not only to the refugees, but also to the hosting communities. When there's a flow of people coming, the first thing that you need to make sure is that the capital, the fixed capital in the region, the factories, the roads, the schools, can also grow accordingly. So there's the need to do an important public policy for the government to be able to reallocate more capital flows to these areas, which again is by definition a win-win-win because local business people are having access to that credit. Sometimes that's not quite easy because there's a lot of budget constraints. So then a second best would be to think like how can we think about the initial placement of refugees in a way that will improve their success. And that sometimes means, of course, free mobility, allowing people to move to different regions. That's something that I think in Latin America we're much better at than in places like in Africa, for instance. But also, like, how can we think about voluntary reallocation in a way that we can, even with data, match the supply that the refugees are bringing in terms of their skills to the demand that the firms need in terms of those skills within Mexico, within the region. And lastly, I want to talk about something that I think is very promising that we know less about, but it has been a big trend in North America, particularly Canada, and maybe to a lesser extent the US, but also Germany, this idea of private sponsorships. And I think that that's a very ingenious way of killing many birds with one stone, so to speak, by achieving a lot of effectiveness, but a lot of scale, because you're bringing private individuals like us in this room who are invested in the success of the refugees by helping them not only to settle at the very short term, but also to expand and find networks that can help them find jobs, that can help them like settle with their families in ways that often governments cannot do. Maybe they can do it, but it's very expensive and very difficult because it needs a lot of attention. So I think here, this is an opportunity that we are actually evaluating it in Canada. And I think it will give us a lot to talk about in the next few years.
Thank you, Dany. Now, Adriana, we've been talking about you, even if we don't realize what we are really seeing in front of us. You are an example now of all the things that we've been talking about. You are a young refugee. You came from Venezuela, then you studied international relationships in Saltillo, or relations, I'm sorry, public relations in Saltillo. You have worked in international commerce also, and now you are a really important spokesperson for the young refugees. What can you tell us about what you've lived with integration of young people in Mexico, first of all, and then I would like you to explain to us what are the differences that you can see when you also understand what's going on in Canada and the US also with young refugees?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Paola. That's a hard one. Actually, it's hard because when you leave, when you flee, you flee with your culture, you flee with your ideas, you flee with your emotions, with your memories. But then you came into a new place, an unknown place, where everything's different, where the culture is different, where the people speaks different, and you have to adapt. You have to learn. And the way that I experimented was because of my career. I had to understand a lot of what was going on in Mexico and the culture and the history and Mexico in the international way, the relation with the US and Canada and the whole world. And that helped me to start loving Mexico. I really love living here. I feel Mexican even when I'm not yet. But I believe that it's key, the way that we learn to adapt, even when we have our own culture, our own experiences, our own things, we leave a part of them behind. And we have to mix them with the things that we are learning when we arrive. And that's the best way that I found for integrate here in Mexico. About other regions, specifically US and Canada, it came into my attention because yesterday we were talking about integration, about migration, and I heard about these kind of areas that we usually have in some part of the region, like Little China, Chinatown, Little Tokyo, and we were talking about integration through those areas. But I was thinking, and is that really integration? Because if you think about it, that's not integration, that's segmentation instead. You're not going with the society and working together with that community. You're putting that community aside and putting them in a place in the city, and you know that they are there, but they are not working directly with you. So that's an example that I found. It's like that if I go and find 10 Venezuelan friends and live in the same residency and just hang out with each other, we're not really integrating and supporting the economy or the policies in the country we're living. And we want to be, as Dany mentioned before, we want to be collaborators instead of a burden here or in the regions we are coming in. Mm-hmm. And when I started working with the network, with the tertiary refugee student network, something that also helped me, and this is global. It's not talking about North America anymore, but it happens. When you know and when you meet people who have the same story that you have and that share with you maybe not the same situation, but the feelings, the emotions, that they get you, they get your feelings, you can talk with them, and it's like they know you. It's like they have been in your feet, and that's how I handle, that's how I struggle with all of these difficulties, because I know that I'm not alone. I know that I can talk with them. I know that I can raise my phone and call and that I'm not alone. And that's also a way to integrate, creating these kind of networks. And just finishing, another barriers that I have been identified is that it's harder when you talk about US and Canada, because if it was hard for me that I speak Spanish and I'm living in a country that speaks Spanish as well, it's hard for refugees and migrants and forced displaced people who not necessarily speak English or French in Canadians' case, for us to adapt, because we don't have another choice. You know, it's like a lottery. Where are you gonna be destined to go, right? So that's a huge challenge. I will be talking about that later. But basically, those are the challenges that I have been identifying and that I can compare to with this region.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adriana, very much for your experience, because that's what we are feeding here from. Now, Luciana, talking about challenges exactly, which kind of policies have been addressed until now to face this increasing human mobility that we see in the region?
Well, after this conversation, I was thinking about what challenges and also what conclusion we have. And for me, the conclusion is that improving the migration governance scheme in the region can facilitate the implementation of integration policies. And again, I am thinking in the new or the current situation of mobility in the continent and through the continent. So as the initial step toward integration, ensuring reception policy for migrants and refugees is crucial. And addressing irregular migration is essential at this time. This situation have negative impact not only in migrants, but also in society, in governments, and in the private sector. Giovanni was talking about the win-win-win scheme, but we need the people have documents, have a legal pathway to have the opportunity to integrate and to have access to rights. And also Adriana was talking about the difficulty related with the language, but the document is another real important barrier. In fact, I have 24 years living in Mexico. I have a formal job. I am document people. I have a lot of problem to integration and inclusion, financial inclusion. So just thinking what happens with people without any document. So for me, this is the first step to can have many others, to think in other policies and to get and achieve a really good integration policy. So to conclude, for me, it's important to develop a comprehensive approach to governing human mobility that is complementary rather than competitive. This means advancing migration governance and asylum governance in a way that recognize they serve different populations and need to work together effectively. I know here there is the two agencies, UN agency, that is really important. They have different mandates, but the government needs to respond to both populations, to migrants and to refugees, and to try to find the way to relation between both ways that sometimes government respond in one way or to force people to get asylum, for example, but people need another legal pathway, legal option, and this is really important right now in this context. And of course, to final with an optimistic point of view, there is many really good practices like the PILD, an acronym in Spanish, the Program of Integration, Labor Integration, leading by UNHCR. And we can think in the option to replicate these practices, not only for refugees, but also for migrants and other population in mobility.
Thank you, Luciana. Now, Giovanni, what are the challenges that you still see, not only in Mexico, but also in the region, so that we can have better integration of refugees and migrants?
Thank you, Paola. So first, I think we managed to make the case, and I think we managed to position the case that with the right tools, refugee can excel, and that this is good. And we're talking about now North America, the three countries. So I think that this is a good starting point. But we do have challenges. And I think the first challenge is narrative. There is still a very negative and toxic narrative around people on the move. There is something that brings, if somebody is moving from his or her country, they surely have a reason, but then there is something that's but probably not the right reason. Probably they are moving, they are escaping, or they've done something wrong. There is something in the narrative that needs to change. And I think there it's one of the big challenges, because then we were listening to Enrique this morning of how journalism and how the news and the media and the quantity of information that floats around, if the information is negative, it propagates negatively. So I think the first challenge is how to change the narrative on facts And I think today we brought facts. And I think that there we need really to work with who can share with us and produce information on the reality of the facts, not on the perceptions. The second, I think, particularly for Mexico and the US, those two countries are absolutely interdependent. And when we talk about the border, even more. I mean, this is all the North Capital Forum about the interdependency, the work between the three countries. But I think when it comes on the border, I don't know which one is more dependent to the other. That I leave it open, this question. But this also creates some policies which are more reactive than proactive. People seen and massing at the northern border between Mexico and the US, policy immediately applied to restrict the movement because this is the still danger. So what has been built in terms of giving documents to refugees and eventually opening up also more to migrants, which is the main challenge at the moment, might actually go backward. I'll give you an example. Since December last year, there's been a huge restriction in giving humanitarian visas to refugees, asylum seekers that enter into Mexico. If you don't have a visa, you cannot work. So I think that this part, the narrative and trying to work more on how this opportunity can be better utilized instead of looking more the risk of the movement, I think it's very important. And then, of course, we already mentioned it, a legal framework, options, public policies, all this to be embedded in something that is stable, is long terms. We have obstacles, for example, in financial inclusions. Many banks don't recognize a refugee document. So, for example, a permanent residency as a document that allows you to open a bank account. Legally, it's correct, but if the bank in the scroll down menu doesn't have refugee permanent residency, they will just say, if I have to change my IT system to open up 3,000 bank account, I'm not going to do it because it's too expensive. So how do we overcome those type of more technical obstacles? So I think that those are the main ones that we are seeing. But I will reiterate again the point on the narrative. I think we need to bring clarity on the fact that refugees are not it's somebody that really can contribute. We have incredible example. I use some, but now we just finished the Olympics. Would you have imagined that refugees would win bronze medal at the Olympics, competing with professional athletes, and they were in the refugee team under the Olympic Committee flag, and the two women, by the way, won the bronze medals at the Olympics and at the Paralympics. It's just one example of how, with the right tools, with the right support, really we can. There is no limit. I think there is no limit. And I think also, let me allow one point on this. I think also that the refugees have been have been going through so much complexity in their life and have really to push from very young age to really try to overcome obstacles that for sure my children haven't seen, that generally you find persons that are not only very strong, very motivated, but also a very sense of how they can contribute to the society that is receiving them. So I think that, again, if the recipe is cooked well, and you need good cooks to do that, which I think there is the public sector. And I want just 1 second to respond to one question that we receive in the chat. We have also example with this. We call them the safe mobility offices. Is in the region, not in Mexico, but there are offices in Guatemala, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in Ecuador, if I remember correctly. Those offices are places where people on the move, refugee and migrant, arrive to this office, and they've been there. They receive counseling and information, and they profiled to see if they are refugees or if they are more on the labor pathway option. And they're offered legal and regular option to be admitted into the US without going through the Darien and going through all the risks. Yesterday, sorry if I will take just one second, no, the day before yesterday, the day that this new government started, there was a tragic accident in the south of Mexico in which vehicles that were traveling, they were exchanged, they were mistakenly considered a criminal group. There was a exchange of fire, and 6 migrants and refugees, we don't know, I think there were more migrants at the profiles, were killed. And more and more would have legal pathways and legal options, less you will have people hiding in trucks and trying to cross and end up. And this is not the first, is not the last tragic accident that you are seeing. So again, just to conclude, legal options, opportunity, a different narrative, and a good mixture of public policies and opportunity. And the last, we have maybe 12 million vacant jobs in this region. I use a figure which, please don't quote me and don't try, nobody I think knows, but between the US, Canada, and Mexico maybe 2 million out of this share, and we have people on the move, as Luciano was saying before, for many reasons they will continue to move. This match between the need of the private sector and the need of people is there, but we're not matching. We're not matching enough. We have examples like our program and others and the work that IM is doing to try to do it, but by far we are not at the scale. So I think really we have a situation in which with the right tools, with the right policy, with the right efforts, and with the right vision, we could really change this around. And also the good thing is to show that this region can be an example for others, including the region where I come from, which is Europe, which is not excelling in showing how refugee and migrant can see as a positive contributor to the society. There is no one elections in my region, where I come from, which the issue I'm going to defend you from the stranger is not on the top of the agenda. So I think that this region could bring a lot of good things to others.
Thank you, Giovanni. Now, Dany, taking a country like the US, what are the main difficulties that you can see for refugees to integrate in a culture like that?
I want to echo what Giovanni said and actually follow up on that, because I do think that Latin America, Mexico, and I'm thinking of a place like Colombia, has a lot to teach to the US. Because I think it all really starts on the narrative. And it just drives me crazy, for instance, that just to give you an example of this difference in narrative, that when the mayor of New York City started seeing the flow of, I think in 2021, it was like we're talking about 10,000 people who had arrived from Venezuela to New York City. He freaked out, right? And the city is in chaos. And, you know, what are we going to do? And I was like, Mayor, have you seen Times Square at 12 on a Wednesday? Like, and you know, I just actually fact-checked myself. New York City, the city, has a GDP of $1.3 trillion, right? And Colombia received 2 million, 2.5, 3 million, who knows the actual number of Venezuelans in a period of 5 years. And Colombia has a GDP of $400 billion. Colombia did it open. I mean, everybody, you know, things can be always better, but they did it, you know, with open arms and with a very different narrative. Like, this could be an opportunity for us. So in the US, we have, you know, we're really stuck at stage 0 of this narrative that is not getting better by actually looking at elections, with one of the candidates promising to deport millions of people when the labor markets in the US needs more millions of people more. And in that sense, you know, I don't know where the answer is there. Like, how do we actually change that? And to me, unsuccessfully, the way it has been done to, you know, keep showing the data and keep trying to make sense of this conversation, but it's very deeply rooted in some narratives that are very hard to change. And the truth is that no party and no policies are actually quote unquote better or not in dealing with this. I just published a paper a couple of months ago where we looked for 25 years, month by month, 2 pieces of data: people crossing the border from the US to Mexico, and a variable that is called labor market tightness in the US, which is essentially how many jobs there are, or particularly how many jobs there are, how many vacancies per unemployed person. The 2 series, they move like this together, up and down, up and down, up and down. It doesn't matter if there's a Republican in the White House, a Democrat in the White House. What we saw in these past 2 years of 2 million people crossing the border for 2 consecutive years, it is all about the pull factor. There's nothing that has happened in the region of an order of magnitude that can explain that rise. What has happened is that the labor markets in the US have become incredibly tight. President Biden is facing the tightest labor markets that any other president has faced, and therefore, they're seeing this huge rise because people are coming because there are jobs. And people will come less whenever there's less jobs. So the answer to this is like, how do we have a migration system that works in a way that you can link the need for jobs with the needs of people? And we're millions of years ahead of that, but hopefully we need to keep this conversation going and make sense of these numbers.
Thank you very much, Dany. And now, Adriana, we know no one really chooses to be a refugee in that concept, but also understanding that we all could be one. Now, what, as a young refugee, can you tell us of the importance of all these policies that today you're hearing about to the real moment of integration?
Thank you so much. First of all, we need to be aware of and understand the difference between a migrant, a refugee, a forcibly displaced person, and a stateless person. With that, we need to understand that we are not in the same condition. We are, and the distinction is that decision that you were mentioning before, that no one chooses to flee, you know? And when you understand that refugees, we are coming into a different context. And there's no way that we can say, okay, it's not working, let's go back to our country and start again and see what happens. So with that situation going on, we need to start making, as all of you were mentioning before, public policies that works. We need an infrastructure, we need an institution, an institution that actually works. Because we do have organizations as UNHCR, International Migration Institution, but we also need more organizations, not necessarily private organizations, that are working on this situation, because these private organizations sadly cannot take in their hands the migrant situations, refugee situations, forcibly displaced and stateless situation. We really need support in this area, because we are having, I don't like to say it this way, but we are having a disorder in this area. We're also having a situation in the border when we all know what's happening in the borders. It's not a secret what's happening, and it's true what Dany was saying, that we are not a burden. We don't have a way to go back, and we want to collaborate. But what happens when we get stuck in the border and we don't have our human rights guarantee? Mm-hmm. What happens when you're not allowed to cross? What happens when you're just stuck there and you don't have a way to work, you don't have a way to go to other place, you don't have the right to go to school, to have a house, to have water in your community? What happens when that comes? So basically, we have that situation, but we also have another one, which is a lack of opportunities. And I cannot say that there's a lack of opportunities here in Mexico, because I was lucky. I got the scholarship from Albert Einstein, and I got graduated through that. But we know that in the region, it happens that when you try to find these opportunities, is one, really, really expensive. And when you're trying to choose between living and studying, what are you going to choose? You're going to choose your secondary and tertiary education, or you're going to choose have food in your refrigerator. Mm-hmm. And we also have, as I mentioned before, the language barrier. We have a lot of opportunities, but what happens when in the region most of the countries don't speak English? And we have these opportunities only in English, and we don't have courses or trainings or opportunities for refugees to learn how to speak English. That's a point that it's really important, and it's not mentioned that much. And finally, we really need outstanding participation, because we have programs, but we don't have refugees involved in these programs. We don't need new programs for us as refugees to be part of the society. We need us refugees to be integrated in the programs that already exist. Mm-hmm. And also, it's important because we want to do it, and it is with us and for us.
Thank you, the four of you. I think you've already summarized what we really needed to understand today, which is a different perspective for the mobility, the human mobility, and for us to also see it not only as a private thing, but also as a public policy that has to come right now to a reality. And as you just said, Adriana, that you also have to be part of those policies so that we can really understand where you're coming from. Thank you very much for the four of you, and thank you too.